The alarm system screamed across every station on the galactic rim. Commander felt her skin shift through 3 different warning colors before she even reached the command center. In her 6th tour of duty along the border, she had never heard this particular alarm. It was the one reserved for impossible events. "Report," she snapped, her vocal sacs trembling despite her attempt at calm. The sensor technician, a young with barely 2 cycles of experience, looked up with eyes dilated in fear. "Signal from Sector 19 null, Commander. Artificial origin. Moving closer." Felt her secondary heart skip. Sector 19 null sat 3,000 light-years beyond the rim, deep in the heart of the deep void. Nothing came from the deep void. Nothing survived there. It was the one universal truth that every species in the galactic communion agreed upon, even when they disagreed on everything else. "That's impossible," said quietly. "Run diagnostics. The equipment must be malfunctioning." "Already done, Commander. 3 times. The signal is real." The galactic communion had stood for 847 cycles, a federation of 23 intelligent species working together across thousands of star systems. They had fought wars, made peace, shared technology, and explored the edges of known space. But they had never, ever ventured into the deep void. They knew better. The void was a region of space where physics itself seemed to break down. Cosmic radiation bombarded everything at levels that shredded DNA and corrupted computer systems. Quantum instabilities made navigation impossible. Gravitational anomalies appeared and disappeared without warning, crushing ships into atomic dust. The communion's best scientists had studied it for centuries and reached the same conclusion every time. The deep void was nature's wall, the universe's way of saying no further. Every attempt to colonize beyond the rim had ended the same way. Silence. Then, if they were lucky, debris fields drifting back towards civilized space. The colonists who survived long enough to send final messages described madness, systems failing for no reason, crew members who stopped recognizing each other's faces. One expedition reported that space itself seemed hungry. So the communion built their outposts along the rim and looked inward, toward the bright core of the galaxy where stars clustered thick and safe. They stopped wondering what lay beyond. They stopped asking questions about the void. Until now. Initiated emergency protocols. Within hours, representatives from all 23 species gathered in the command center, either in person or through quantum-linked holograms. The meeting chamber filled with the sounds and smells of 24 different forms of communication. Clicking mandibles, color-shifting skin, pheromone clouds, telepathic pulses, and spoken language running through translators. "The signal is not random," announced Dr. Is, the communion's chief. His tentacles rippled with anxiety as he displayed the analysis on the holographic screens. "It repeats every 47 seconds. It contains mathematical sequences, and it's getting stronger, which means the source is approaching at approximately 0.7. "Weapons?" asked General, a massive whose species had evolved as apex predators. His translator made his growls sound almost civilized. "Unknown. We can't get clear readings through the void's interference, but the energy signature suggests something large, very large." Ambassador, a crystalline being whose species communicated through harmonics, chimed a question that the translator rendered as, "What do we know about whoever sent this?" "Nothing," admitted. "The signal uses no known language or communication protocol. We've been attempting to decode it for 14 rotations." "Could it be the?" someone whispered. The name sent ripples of fear through the chamber. There were legends, stories the old species told about the things that lived in the void. Creatures of pure energy or living darkness or mathematical impossibility, depending on which culture's mythology you consulted. They were the reason the ancient species had fled to the rim in the first place, thousands of years ago. "We don't know if they even exist," said firmly, though her own skin had shifted to the color of deep unease. "They're legends." "Legends based on something," General rumbled. "Our ancestors ran from the void for a reason." The debate continued for hours. Some argued for immediate military response. Others wanted to flee deeper into the galaxy. A few suggested attempting communication. But they all shared the same underlying terror. Something had survived in the place where nothing should survive, and now it was coming for them. On the 15th rotation of analysis, Dr. Is broke the code. Was in her quarters, trying to sleep despite the anxiety churning in her stomachs, when her communicator shrieked. She made it to the linguistics lab in under 2 minutes, finding Dr. Is staring at his screens with an expression she couldn't read. "What is it?" she demanded. "I decoded the message," he said slowly, "but I must have made an error. It doesn't make sense." "Show me." He brought up the translation on the main screen, read it 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. The message said, "Hello, sorry we're late. Got a bit turned around out here. This is the UES Perseverance. We're human. Mind if we drop by?" "Human," repeated. "That's not in any database." "I know. I've checked every linguistic archive in the Communion. The word doesn't exist. Neither does their ship designation or their species identifier. They're completely unknown." "How long have they been in the void?" Dr. Is manipulated his controls, bringing up trajectory analysis. Based on their vector and the signal degradation patterns, they've been traveling through the deep void for approximately 37 cycles. Felt all 3 of her hearts stop. That's impossible. Nothing survives 37 seconds in the void, let alone 37 cycles. "I triple-checked the math, Commander. Either our understanding of the void is completely wrong, or these humans are something we've never encountered before." "Or both," said quietly. She called another emergency session. This time, the fear in the chamber was different, more primal. They weren't just afraid of what was coming. They were afraid of what it meant. "If something can survive the deep void," Ambassador chimed, "then everything we know is wrong. The void isn't a natural barrier. It's a filter. And whatever these humans are, they pass through it." "We should destroy them before they reach the rim," General argued. "Send every warship we have. Hit them while they're still weakened from the crossing." "We don't know if they're weakened," Dr. Is objected. "We don't know anything about them. They might be hostile, yes, but they might also be refugees, explorers, or traders. Their message seemed friendly." "Their message seemed casual," corrected. "They apologized for being late, as if traveling through hell itself was a minor inconvenience. That's either confidence or insanity." "Perhaps it's both," suggested Ambassador. "Perhaps that's how they survived." The debate raged for 2 more rotations. Eventually, made the decision that would change galactic history. They would allow the humans to approach, but every military vessel in the sector would be ready. They would meet these impossible visitors with weapons charged and shields raised, prepared for anything. Or so they thought. When the UES Perseverance finally emerged from the void and into sensor range, the collective shock rippled through every ship in the Communion fleet. The human vessel was massive, easily twice the size of the largest Communion battleship, but it looked nothing like any ship they'd ever seen. It was ugly. That was the first word that came to mind. The hull was asymmetrical, covered in patches and repairs that didn't match the original construction. Scorch marks ran along its flanks, evidence of radiation damage that should have destroyed it. Parts of the ship seemed to be held together with what Dr. Is later identified as welding and crude fasteners. It looked like something built from salvage, desperation, and spite. But it was the energy readings that truly frightened them. The ship's reactor pulsed with configurations that violated the principles, the fundamental laws of energy generation that every Communion species followed. According to their sensors, the human reactor shouldn't work. It should have torn itself apart and taken half the sector with it. Yet there it was, running smoothly, powering a ship that had crossed the... "They're hailing us," the communications officer announced. straightened her uniform, and activated wondering what kind of creature could survive what these humans had survived. The face that appeared on the screen looked disturbingly ordinary. 2 eyes, 1 mouth, bilateral symmetry. The human skin was a light brown color, and thin hair covered the top of its head. It smiled, showing flat teeth that suggested an omnivorous species. "Hello there," the human said through its own translator, which rendered the communion's standard language perfectly. "I'm Captain Sarah of the United Earth ship Perseverance. Thanks for not shooting at us. I know we probably look pretty rough after the crossing, but we're friendly. Promise." Found her voice after a moment of stunned silence. "I am commander of the Galactic Communion. Your arrival has caused significant concern. Nothing survives passage through the deep void. How are you here?" Captain's smile didn't waver, but something dark flickered in her eyes. "Well, Commander, I'd say we survived through a combination of stubbornness, jury-rigged engineering, and refusing to accept that something was impossible just because everyone said it was. Also, we lost a lot of good people getting here. But that's a longer conversation. Would you mind if we docked somewhere? My crew could really use some actual gravity and food that doesn't come from recycled algae." Glanced at General, who had his weapons officer's finger hovering over the firing controls. She looked at Ambassador, whose harmonics had shifted to frequencies that suggested deep uncertainty. She looked at Dr. Is, who was frantically running analysis after analysis, trying to understand how these creatures existed. Then she looked back at Captain, at the casual confidence in that alien face, at the massive ship that shouldn't exist, and made the second decision that would change everything. "Permission to dock granted," said. "But Captain, I think we need to have a very long conversation about what you are and where you came from." "Happy to chat," replied. "Fair warning, though, the answer might not be comforting. Turns out humans are really good at surviving things that should kill us. It's kind of our specialty." The went dark. Sat in her command chair, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. The void had answered their ancient fear, and impossibly it had answered with something that seemed almost cheerful about the whole ordeal. She wasn't sure which terrified her more, what the humans had survived, or the fact that they'd done it deliberately. The docking procedures began. History lurched forward, and the Galactic Communion's comfortable understanding of the universe prepared to shatter completely. Captain Sarah stood in the docking bay of Station Rim 7, flanked by her small diplomatic team, and tried not to show how exhausted she really was. 37 cycles in the void had aged all of them in ways that medical scanners couldn't quite measure. She'd started the journey with dark hair and steady hands. Now silver streaked her temples, and her hands only stopped shaking when she focused. But the aliens didn't need to know that, not yet. The commander who greeted them was taller than had expected, with skin that shifted colors like oil on water. Her large eyes studied the humans with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging every detail for later analysis. "Captain," Commander said through her translator, "welcome to Station Rim 7. I've arranged quarters for you and your team. But first, if you don't mind, our medical staff would like to conduct health screenings." "Standard quarantine procedures," agreed. "Makes sense. Though I should warn you, human biology might be a bit surprising." That turned out to be an understatement. Dr. Is, the assigned to examine them, took one look at the medical readouts and immediately called for a security team. Watched with some amusement as the tentacled doctor backed away from his scanner, his skin tone shifting through what she guessed were alarm colors. "You're filled with toxins," Dr. Is said, his translator struggling with his agitation. "Your bloodstream contains billions of organisms that would be classified as infectious agents. Your cells are constantly bombarded by radiation damage. How are you alive?" "That's just normal human biology," medical officer Dr. James Park explained patiently. "The organisms you're seeing are our microbiome. We need them to survive. And yes, Our DNA takes radiation damage constantly, but we've got pretty robust repair mechanisms. But the oxygen levels, Doctor is protested. You breathe concentrations that would be toxic to half the species in the communion. Yeah, we like our oxygen, Park agreed. Perks of evolving on a planet with photosynthetic organisms that spent billions of years pumping it into the atmosphere. Watched as the revelation spread through the station. Within hours, every biologist in the sector was reviewing the human medical data, and the reactions ranged from horror to fascination. Humans, they learned, came from what the Communion classified as a Class 12 death world, a planet so hostile that only the hardiest species could evolve there. Earth, as the humans called it, orbited a yellow star in a region of space thick with cosmic radiation. The planet's magnetic field was strong enough to deflect most of it, but not all. Humans had evolved under constant bombardment from particles that would sterilize gentler worlds. Their immune systems were aggressive enough to attack their own bodies if given the wrong signals. Their pain tolerance was through the roof because their planet was covered in creatures and plants that had evolved to hurt them. Your world tried to kill you for your entire evolutionary history, said, reviewing the data with a mixture of horror and admiration. How did your species survive? We're stubborn, replied simply, and we adapt. When something tries to kill us, we figure out how to kill it back or at least make friends with it, sometimes both. But the real shock came when explained how humanity had found the Galactic Communion in the first place. They gathered in a conference room designed to accommodate multiple species. Stood at the head of the table, a holographic display showing Earth's location relative to Communion space. Between them lay the vast emptiness of the deep void. 60 years ago, by Earth's calendar, we detected your beacon signals, began. Took us a while to realize they were artificial. When we did, well, there was a lot of debate about what to do. Some people wanted to wait to develop better technology before attempting contact. Others argued we should send automated probes first. But you came yourselves, said. We did, because Earth had recently gone through some difficult times, and humanity needed something to unite around. The idea of first contact, of finding out we weren't alone in the universe, that was big enough to get most of us on the same page. So we built the ships and launched the expedition. Through the deep void, Doctor has said, his tone suggesting disbelief. You knew about the dangers. We did preliminary surveys, sent probes. Most of them stopped transmitting after a few light years. The ones that made it further back sent data that was terrifying. Paused, and her expression darkened. We knew it would be bad. We knew people would die. We launched anyway. Ambassador chimed a question. Why would you accept such losses? Because the potential reward justified the risk, said. That's how humanity has always worked. We knew that making contact with you, with an entire galactic civilization, could change everything for our species. Access to new technology, new ideas, new perspectives, maybe even allies. That was worth the cost. How many ships did you lose? Asked quietly. His jaw tightened. We launched with 23 vessels, 14,000 crew members total. The Perseverance is the only ship that made it through. We have 412 people left. The silence in the conference room was absolute. The Communion representatives stared at with expressions that ranged from horror to incomprehension. They'd sent 23 ships into hell, knowing most wouldn't return, and they'd done it on purpose. 74% casualties, General said finally. In any Communion military operation, that would be considered an unacceptable disaster, a reason to court-martial the entire command structure. We call it acceptable losses, said flatly. Not acceptable as in good, acceptable as in the cost we were willing to pay for the objective. Every person on those ships volunteered knowing the odds. They knew they were probably going to die. They came anyway. But why? Demanded. Why would anyone volunteer for near-certain death? Because someone had to go first. because humanity doesn't believe in letting the impossible stop us, because we'd rather die trying than live wondering what might have been. Leaned forward, her eyes intense. Commander, every species in your communion looked at the deep void and decided it was a wall. You saw it as the end of space. We saw it as a problem to solve. Doctor is brought up the technical data from the Perseverance's crossing. As the communion specialists reviewed it, the story of humanity's journey became clear, and it was more terrifying than any of them had imagined. The radiation had been the first challenge. Within weeks of entering the void, the human crews were experiencing DNA damage at rates that should have killed them. Their solution: they'd brought genetic engineering equipment and modified themselves in transit. They'd enhanced their cellular repair mechanisms, boosted their radiation resistance, and altered their neurochemistry to better handle the psychological stress. You experimented on yourselves, Doctor is asked, horrified, while flying through the most dangerous region of known space. We didn't have much choice, Engineer Lieutenant Maria Santos said. Die from radiation poisoning or try something that might work. Pretty easy decision. When their reactors started failing from the quantum instabilities, they'd built new ones using principles they'd invented on the spot. When their navigation systems couldn't handle the gravitational anomalies, they'd switched to manual calculations and dead reckoning. When crew members started going mad from the isolation and the constant stress, others took their posts without ceremony, maintaining operations through sheer force of will. You lost ships to reactor explosions, noted, reading the casualty reports. Why didn't you turn back after the first one? Because turning back meant wasting the sacrifice of everyone who died so far, said. We had a mission. We completed it. You're insane, General rumbled, but there was a note of respect in his growl. Probably, agreed. That helps in the void, actually. The isolation does something to your head. Having people who are already a little crazy seems to provide some protection. Ambassador chimed thoughtfully. You treat the impossible as merely difficult. You treat near-certain death as acceptable risk. You modify your own biology in transit through hostile space. Tell me, Captain, what exactly are humans? Smiled and for the first time saw the steel underneath the friendly exterior. We're a species that evolved fighting everything. Our planet tried to kill us, so we mastered it. Our biology tried to fail, so we enhanced it. The universe said we couldn't cross the void, so we did it anyway. We're what happens when a species refuses to accept limits. That's not an answer, said. Sure it is. You asked what we are. We're survivors, Commander. We're problem solvers. We're the species that looks at hell and asks how hot it really is. Smile widened. And we're your new neighbors. Hope that's okay. The implications settled over the communion representatives like a heavy blanket. They'd spent 847 cycles believing they understood the universe's rules. The void was impassable. Death worlds didn't produce space-faring civilizations. Certain losses were unacceptable. Humanity had just proven every assumption wrong. Over the following days, as diplomatic channels opened and more information was exchanged, the communion's understanding of humanity deepened. And with it, their unease grew. Humans had been space-faring for less than a century, but they'd already colonized their entire star system. They'd fought wars with themselves and somehow united afterward. Their culture celebrated risk-takers and rebels. Their heroes were people who'd failed repeatedly before succeeding. They had a saying, failure is not falling down but refusing to get up. They're going to change everything, Doctor is said to one evening, reviewing the cultural data. Just by existing, they challenge every assumption we've built the communion on. I know, replied. The question is whether that's good or bad. She got her answer sooner than expected. 3 months after humanity's arrival, every sensor on the rim began screaming the same alarm that had heralded the Perseverance's approach. But this time, the signal came from multiple sources, multiple massive sources, all emerging from Sector 19 null, following the trail the humans had blazed. Rushed to the command center, her skin shifting through panic colors. On the screens, she saw them. 17 vessels, each the size of a small moon, composed of matter that seemed to shift between solid and energy states. They moved through space in ways that violated physics, leaving trails of distorted reality behind them. The legends were real, and humanity had led them straight to the rim. "Get Captain," ordered, her voice barely steady. "Get her now." The emergency council assembled within the hour, every member present in the flesh rather than via hologram. They needed to see each other's faces for this. They needed to know they were truly in this together, facing what might be the end of their civilization. Captain arrived looking grim, flanked by her senior officers. She took one look at the sensor displays showing the approaching, and said something in her native language that the translators couldn't quite parse, though the tone suggested it wasn't polite. "We didn't know they existed," said immediately. "Our surveys detected gravitational anomalies in that region, but we thought they were natural phenomena. If we'd known we were going to wake up sleeping monsters, we would have chosen a different route." "Would you?" General asked, his tone accusing. "You people seem to enjoy impossible challenges." "There's a difference between accepting risk and being suicidal," shot back. "We take calculated risks, not stupid ones. This is bad. This is really, really bad." Brought up the analysis. They were ancient, perhaps older than the communion itself. They existed in the spaces between stars, in the regions where reality grew thin. They fed on something the scientists couldn't quite define, perhaps the quantum foam of spacetime itself, perhaps the psychic energy of living beings. The ancient records suggested they were attracted to fear. "Every war simulation predicts total defeat," General reported, his voice heavy. "We can't fight them. Our weapons are designed for conventional matter. These things exist partially outside our dimension. Our missiles pass through them. Our energy weapons diffuse before making contact." "What about evacuation?" someone asked. "We have 30,000 ships in this sector, 3 million personnel. Even if we started immediate evacuation, that will reach us in 72 hours. We can't move everyone in time." "Then we fight," Ambassador chimed, though the harmonics carried notes of despair. "We hold them off as long as possible to buy time for evacuations." "You'll die," said bluntly. "All of you. Your weapons don't work, your shields don't work, and these things are attracted to panic. The more afraid you are, the stronger they get. You can't win." "And yet you survived the void where they live," said quietly. "How?" Was silent for a long moment. Then she looked at her officers, some unspoken communication passing between them, and nodded as if they'd reached a decision. "We didn't know they were there, so we weren't afraid of them. We were too busy being angry at the radiation, the equipment failures, the dead crew members. Humanity runs on spite, Commander. Fear makes us angry, and anger makes us dangerous." She paused. "And there's something else. The void tried to make us afraid. That isolation, that emptiness, it was like it wanted us to give up. But we're really, really bad at giving up." "So what do we do?" asked. "We make ourselves too annoying to bother with," said. "You can't kill the fine, but you can make them regret following us here. You can teach them that this part of space is defended by creatures too stubborn to know when they're beaten." "You're talking about fighting anyway," General said. "I'm talking about harassment on a scale that makes them decide we're not worth the trouble. Look, humanity has a long history of fighting things stronger than us. Gods, monsters, empires, diseases, each other. We've learned that you don't always need to win. Sometimes you just need to make the other guy decide that beating you costs more than it's worth." Over the next 72 hours, and her officers taught the communion something they'd never considered: the doctrine of escalate to de-escalate. Against an enemy you couldn't kill, you made yourself too much trouble to bother with. The humans opened their databases, sharing weapons concepts that made the communion scientists recoil in horror. biological warfare packages that treated void matter as an infection to overwhelm, gravity mines that created microsingularities, not to destroy, but to redirect, sonic weapons calibrated to frequencies that gave the equivalent of headaches. These are war crimes, Doctor is protested, looking at the biological weapon specifications. Against other living beings, yeah, agreed. But they aren't alive in any sense we recognize. They're quantum phenomena with something resembling intelligence. Different rules apply. You developed these weapons in 3 months, asked, awed and horrified. We developed them in 3 days. The last 3 days. Humanity's really good at weaponizing anything when we're motivated. And being told that monsters followed us here to eat our new neighbors, that's pretty motivating. The Communion fleet assembled, 30,000 ships arranged in formations designed by human tactical doctrine. They deployed the new weapons, building a defensive perimeter that looked more like a minefield than a battle line, and then did something that confused everyone. She broadcast a message to the approaching on every frequency, including several that human scientists had identified as potentially detectable by quantum-dimensional entities. "Attention, void squids," his message began, and felt her skin shift to colors of shock at the casual disrespect. "You followed us here looking for easy prey. Congratulations, you found the galactic equivalent of a hornet's nest. My name is Captain Sarah. I represent both the humans and the galactic communion. We're not leaving. We're not running. And if you want to try feeding on us, you're going to learn why humanity evolved on a planet that spent 4 billion years trying to kill us." "You're trying to make them angry," General said, disbelief in his voice. "I'm trying to make them aware," corrected. "The feed on fear because most species run from them, but humans don't run from things. We get mad at them. And I want them to understand that before they get here." They arrived 71 hours after detection, 17 impossible vessels emerging from quantum space like nightmares made manifest. They moved toward the rim, and the sensors reported something that made everyone's blood run cold. The ships were broadcasting on psychic frequencies, trying to induce terror in every living being in the sector. It worked on most of the communion species. Panic spread through the fleet like wildfire. Crews began abandoning their posts. Ships tried to break formation and flee. Then broadcast again, this time to the communion fleet. "All ships, this is Captain. I know you're scared. That's fine. Fear is a rational response to giant monsters. But here's the thing about fear. You can be scared and still fight. Humanity's entire history is people being absolutely terrified and doing the brave thing anyway. So yeah, be scared. Then get mad that these things think they can make you run. Use that anger. Make them regret coming here." It shouldn't have worked. Words shouldn't have been able to overcome the primal terror they induced. But's voice carried something that the communion species recognized. The sound of someone who'd been afraid before and kept going anyway. The sound of someone who'd crossed hell and came out the other side still fighting. The fleet steadied. Not because the fear went away, but because something stronger than fear took hold. Anger that these creatures thought they could make them flee. The first vessel entered weapons range. The communion fleet opened fire with their new arsenal, and space itself seemed to scream. The biological weapons hit first, packages of engineered microorganisms designed to treat void matter as a substrate for uncontrolled growth. They weren't alive, but they were made of something that could support simple chemical reactions. The biologicals didn't kill them, but they made their hulls react in ways that clearly caused distress. The gravity mines activated next, creating tiny singularities that bent spacetime just enough to make navigation difficult. They could move through dimensions, but they still had to interact with gravity. The mines didn't stop them, but they slowed them down and disrupted their formation. Then came the sonic weapons, broadcasting on frequencies that humanity had discovered by accident during the crossing. The quantum realm carried vibrations differently than normal space, and certain frequencies caused interference patterns that the clearly found unpleasant. But the most effective weapon was pure human audacity. Ship, the Perseverance, charged directly at the lead vessel. "What is she doing?" demanded, watching the sensors in horror. "Proving a point," Lieutenant Santos said. She was manning a tactical station on Rim 7, coordinating the human volunteers who'd spread throughout the Communion fleet. "Watch." The Perseverance flew straight into this hull, which existed partially outside normal space. For a moment, sensors showed the ship disappearing into the quantum foam. Then it emerged on the other side, shields blazing with exotic energy but intact. His voice came over the command channel. "All ships, they can't grab what they can't catch. They exist in multiple dimensions, which means they're not fully solid in ours. Fast, maneuverable ships can fly through them. Use that." It was insanity. It was brilliant. It was so perfectly human that found herself laughing despite the terror. The battle that followed was unlike anything in Communion military history. Ships flew in and out of the vessels, deploying weapons at point-blank range before escaping through the quantum gaps. They didn't try to destroy the enemy. They harassed them, annoyed them, made themselves into the galactic equivalent of mosquitoes that were too fast to swat. And the used to prey that ran or died found themselves facing something new. A fleet that refused to either run or die, that seemed to get angrier the more afraid it became. The battle lasted 6 days, not because either side was winning, but because they were trying to decide if the effort was worth the reward. The Communion lost 800 ships, a horrific casualty rate by any standard, but they didn't break. Every time a ship fell, the survivors just got angrier. On the 7th day, they retreated. They didn't flee in panic. They simply faded back into quantum space, returning to the deep void from which they'd come. But before they left, the lead vessel did something unprecedented. It broadcast a signal that human quantum sensors managed to partially translate. The message seemed to be, "Not worth the effort." The silence that followed was absolute. The Communion fleet hung in space, battered and exhausted, staring at the place where they had been. They'd survived. Against all odds, against ancient horrors that had driven their ancestors to flee, they'd survived. Sat in her command chair, her skin cycling through colors of exhaustion, relief, and lingering terror. His face appeared on her, and the human captain looked just as tired. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," said. "You could have run. Your ship could have escaped before they arrived. Why did you stay?" "Because you're our neighbors now," said simply. "And humans defend their neighbors. Besides, something needed to teach those void squids that this galaxy's occupied. You didn't know if your plan would work." "Nope, figured it out as we went. That's also very human of us." The formal diplomatic reception happened a week later, after the casualties had been counted and the repairs had begun. The Communion Council met in full session, all 23 species represented, to address the humans who had changed their universe in ways they were still trying to understand. Ambassador chimed the question they'd all been thinking. "Why did you really come here, Captain? The truth this time? Was it just curiosity, the pursuit of knowledge?" Stood before the assembled council, her dress uniform crisp despite everything they'd been through, and considered the question carefully. "Honestly, we were lonely," she said finally. "Humanity spent our entire